Well, welcome everyone. Welcome back, friends, to, sorry, let me get situated here. To the, welcome back to another academic year. And also more importantly, welcome back to the 2021-2022 Funding Friday season that I know that you've all been eagerly anticipating. So originally I mentioned that many of you might have attended our workshop in the end of August with Associate Dean Rose Wesson from CCNY and also Associate Vice Chancellor Schneider, who's the our lead research officer in the Office of Research, talking about sort of general NSF, how the programs work, how the review process works. And I think we had a really good discussion, but this is sort of intended to be the part two. So it was, the first part was general NSF sort of overview, how the system works and how CUNY sort of fits into the NSF mission and how we can develop better proposals that address the CUNY, that address the NSF priority areas. And then this one is about is how to read an NSF RFP and assessing your readiness to write a proposal. And today we're super happy to have Dr. Linda Vigdor, who is the Associate Director of Proposal Development at the ASRC, the Advanced Science Research Center. Many of you may have know of her for, she's been running a very successful series of NSF career award writing boot camps, which she's been running for the last 5 years. And also joining me today, and I'd forgotten to introduce myself, I am Effie McLaughlin. I'm the Director of Grants and Research Programs in the Office of Research. I've been in this position for about 10 years, and I oversee the internal seed grant programs as well as some research development activities of this. This is one of those research development activities. And I'm also joined here today by Adam Greenberg, who is the grants director at the ASRC and works with Linda at the ASRC. And he's going to be helping me, well, both Linda and I sort of answer questions and monitor the chat. So when Adam and Linda and I first met over the summer to try to develop sort of an introduction to writing an NSF grant proposal, we were sort of thinking in terms of larger scale, how can we develop a model for approaching this that actually might be transferable? So we could actually transfer this maybe to NIH programs or other types of programs. And so it's sort of like the basics of how you approach an RFP, how you plan your time, how you, structure your work. So we were seeking to develop a sort of a flexible and transferable research development model that could serve CUNY faculty at all levels and could also try to address some of the challenges that are faced by CUNY when developing competitive, fundable research proposals for federal agencies. So this is the second year that I've been running this webinar series, and the goal is to create a living resource for research development support and information for researchers across the university. I am right now in the process of finalizing our 2021-2022 academic calendar, and I think we have a really good lineup for this year. On October 1st, which you'll all receive an email about, we're having a webinar with our Public Interest Technology University Network partner, NYU, to talk about CUNY NYU public interest technology efforts. We're also going to have with Megan Wacha, who presented a couple of our webinars last year from the Office of Library Services. She's the scholarly communications librarian. Megan's going to present about the scholarly uses of Wikipedia, sort of an introduction to Wikipedia. We're going to have a webinar on applying for Fulbright Awards, performing arts funding opportunities. So there's a lot of stuff coming up, and please look out for that. All of these webinars are recorded. So if you are not comfortable having your image on screen, please turn off your camera. And we encourage you, as always, I very much encourage you to provide feedback on this webinar, make suggestions for future topics. Pretty much our entire webinar season this year was suggestions that I'd gotten from faculty and staff across CUNY about sort of areas that they'd like to see addressed. And then just sort of general housekeeping. So this presentation is going to run about an hour, but we're actually running the webinar is going to be a little bit different today in that it's going to be much more interactive. Linda, Dr. Vigdor has organized the presentation where she's actually going to ask you questions, and you're going to be responsible for providing us some answers to actually sort of think as this is going along as she's going through these RFPs. So Adam and I are going to monitor the chat. She's going to ask some questions. If you'd like to answer, please put it in the chat, and then we'll read out your answers. But then definitely at the end, we're also going to leave some time at the end also for question answer, where there might be an opportunity to turn your camera on and ask a question directly. But in the interest of keeping things moving during the webinar, we'd like it if you could just put all your comments and questions in the chat, and we'll try to get to all of those. So allow me to briefly introduce our speaker. So Dr. Linda Vigdor is an artist with MFAs in fine art and costume design. She has a PhD in educational psychology from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, and she also held a postdoc at the University of Arizona focused on art and technoscience collaborations, which is super interesting. So Dr. Vigdor joined the ASRC in 2015, and during that time, she's created many workshops and programs. And as I had mentioned earlier, probably her most well-known is her NSF Career Bootcamp, which led to 14 new career awards for CUNY faculty across the university, as well as many other career type or regular awards for other funding agencies. And she also organized a convergence workshop for all of CUNY in 2018. So I definitely want to have her back to talk about convergent research. So please, Dr. Vigdor, Linda, would you like to take it away?
Okay, so thank you all for coming this afternoon and coming to learn how to read an RFP, which is something that we all should do. And so I'm gonna, so as Effie mentioned, it's gonna be kind of interactive. Probably more interactive than I've done for a large group, but it should work. So mostly it's about, I'm asking you for answers to questions I'm going to pose because, you know, as educators, we all know that you learn best by engaging rather than somebody talking at you. So this is like the learning theory behind it all. But that means you actually have to do a little bit more work than, and I don't have to do it all because I know how to read an RFP. All right, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share two screens, but first let me go through the initial slides. So you all got emails, so there are some handouts, worksheets available. One is analyzing an RFP worksheet. We're not going to use that today, but it should be useful to you when you start working on your own proposal with a different RFP. We have 4 sample RFPs that we pulled out. I'm going to focus on one today, but there's 2 other ones we're not going to look at, but they're interesting for different reasons. So each RFP will have something interesting that you won't find in another RFP. So it's a little bit of a scavenger hunt to see what it is. There is also a recommended proposal development timeline. That's for your information and to encourage you to start thinking about your proposal well in advance. You know, one of my missions at CUNY is to help people get out of this strategy of starting their proposal 2 weeks before it's due. We're looking for much longer timelines. And then I'll talk briefly at the end about my fall grants bootcamp. So there's a flyer that's available for that as well. All right, so I like this cartoon. Fred, rumor has it, you're closing in on some profound elemental truths about the universe, and I wanted to remind you that our research funding specifically prohibits that. So in a sense, this is why you need to read the RFP, because an RFP will tell you what they're looking to fund. And should you get that award, you can't then go do something different. So it's really important to understand what they're looking to fund for a particular program. All right, so the RFP itself. So an RFP is, what is an RFP? It is research funding opportunity, basically. And at NIH, it's often called an FOA, funding opportunity announcement. At the Department of Defense, they're BAAs. So they're all basically telling you what is the program that they're offering, that they're soliciting proposals for. So it is, what is it for? It's to tell you what they're looking for and what you need to do to write a at least compliant proposal. So then the question is how should you read it? We're going to go over that today. And when should you refer to it? So let me ask, this is the first question. When should you refer to an RFP? Anybody have any ideas when is a good time to look at this? No? So I would say certainly we're going to look at it before you start writing your proposal, right? Do we agree with that one? Anybody disagree with that one? No.
Someone said 6 months before submission, and then somebody else said all the time.
Yeah, actually, all the time is probably the most accurate. Yeah, read it before you're going to start, as soon as you become aware of the possibility that this could be interesting and you want to investigate whether you're going to apply. As you start to write, you probably want to be a good idea to go over it with your grants office. And then, as you're writing, keep looking at it. But before you submit, it's also a good idea to look it over to make sure you've actually got in your proposal everything that they've asked for and it is accurate, because there's, as you'll see as we go through this one, there's lots of rules.
Linda, can I just ask you something? Because one of the participants said you should read the RFP as soon as it is released. And that's actually a really good point. I mean, there's some RFPs that have continuing deadlines every year, but then how do you find out if there's a brand new program that might be a good fit for you? How do you find out about new programs?
Oh, well, everyone who is interested in NSF funding should get on NSF's email list, especially for the programs that you're interested in. So I get daily emails about various programs. So that's the easiest way. You can also do things in Pivot. CUNY has subscriptions to Pivot. You can sign up for notices there. Because if you don't do it that way, then you actually have to go to the website and do a lot of research, which would take a fair amount of time. So I would, but if there's specific programs that you're interested in, it would be a good idea to check those regularly. And the other thing that's I find a little curious about NSF, let's say, is, because everybody agrees, or let's say reasonable people agree that you should start your proposal well in advance, minimum of 3 months for a single PI proposal, maybe a year for a much larger collaborative proposal, center proposal. But NSF sometimes will only release a new RFP a couple of months before the deadline. So that's an interesting space. Sometimes I've heard, that if you have a good relationship with a program officer, you may have insider information. But there's a lot of ins and outs. But developing a relationship with a program officer is also a really good thing to do. We won't really talk a great deal about that today. However, it will be mentioned. But yeah, get on all of the agencies' email lists that you're interested in and that you think your research fits with. All right, so we're going to talk about RFPs today, but what I have up here is 2 different types of program websites at NSF. We have atmospheric chemistry and this ecology and evolution of infectious diseases. So what do you notice that's different in these 2 programs? I've kind of given you a hint. Is there a difference in what type of information they're going to give you in these 2 programs?
Sarbani says program description, synopsis is one response.
Well, they both have a synopsis.
Yes. Does anyone notice anything about deadlines?
Well, it's not the deadlines. Well, there is actually actually, that is good. I didn't actually pay attention. There is a difference in deadlines. So you are right about that. NSF in many programs is moving to no defined deadlines, but keep in mind that is a strategy on NSF's part, people think, to reduce the number of proposals, because with no deadlines, people often never actually get around to submitting their proposal. so they have fewer to review.
Yeah, so one participant says one details that you have to refer to the PPA, however you call that, PAPG, the PAPG.
Yeah.
And then one links to the RFP, the one for ecology and evolution. So those are some differences too.
Yeah, so that's actually the key one for today, that atmospheric chemistry is not giving you a full RFP. All of the information they're giving you about their program is on this page. So it's also a notably short synopsis. Other programs will also not have a full RFP, but they'll actually have a longer synopsis. So everything they're telling you about what they're looking for is in this short paragraph synopsis. And everything else, and that means that to submit the proposal, you just follow all the guidelines in the PAPG, which is the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide. We will call it PAPG from now on. Whereas the Ecology and Evolution of Infectious Diseases does have a full RFP, and the way you know to find it is it's right up here in the corner. This is NSF's beta website, but that's what I got when I went to it. So I think they're going to be moving to this. So for today, assume we have clicked on this 21609 link, and we're going to look at this RFP, which I have a little screen capture of the front page of it down here. So, because I have run across this, people get confused when they come across only this and can't find an RFP. That means if you want additional information, you do have to talk to the program officer. All right, so these are the example proposals, which are available in the link. So the question is why should you spend time rereading the RFP? What are some things you can find out? Do you know offhand?
That was what I was thinking. Eligibility. Thomas said eligibility was the first thing that occurred to me.
Eligibility, focus areas. Yeah.
Yeah, if it's appropriate for your own research, right?
Yeah. So all these things are good.
Funding levels, right?
Yeah. Investigate the program fit. Assess eligibility. Assess resources. So, you need certain resources to be able to do a project. Do you have appropriate equipment, things like that? Identify submission requirements. Assess your readiness to apply and the potential competitiveness of the proposal. That actually falls in line with the funding levels. All right, so using the RFP. So there's some key things to start. So I'm going to actually now stop sharing this. I want to share two screens. The other thing I forgot to mention is that this Ecology and Evolution of Infectious Diseases RFP, I'm going to use it on a double screen share. I'm going to share two screens. If it's too small for you to see on the screen, you can always open it up through the link on your own computer, or if you've printed it out, it'll be easier to read. So let me.
Yeah, we were a little bit concerned because I know sometimes, depending on how you're viewing these Zooms, sometimes when people share their screens, the document might be too small. But so we encourage you that you can. We gave you the link for the RFP she's discussing, so you'll be able to see it there. It's the Ecology and Evolution of Infectious Diseases program, which is the first in that list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So first thing when you look at an RFP and you want to use it to write a proposal is you want to know you have the current one. So how do you find that out? How do you know that? How do we know that this Ecology and Evolution RFP is current?
Well, look at the deadlines, if there's an upcoming deadline.
That's one way. But even before you get to the deadline, there's a pretty good hint.
Somebody said read the instructions. Oh, somebody knows about the numbering of the
yeah, okay.
Patty. So look at the number on the
A.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Also, there are hints in, because I've highlighted things. This is a test with answers. So yeah, so NSF 21609. So this 21 seriously suggests that it's a 2021 RFP. And it also tells you that it replaces the one from 2585. Where this gets tricky is, say you kind of know you want to apply for a particular program and you just do a Google search for it. Because the internet doesn't lose anything, you may, in your search may show old RFPs. So you want to make sure that you have a current one. Even NSF doesn't seem to lose things, so they have old archived documents there as well. All right. So we know how to know the current one. So before you write, you want to read and understand this RFP. You want to assess eligibility, the program parameters, think about the deadline. One thing that I will repeat several times is the RFP instructions always supersede the PAPG. So for example, the PAPG says that a project description is 15 pages. If your RFP says that you can write a project description of up to 20 pages, then you probably want to write 20 pages, not 15. Because also that indicates that they're looking for 5 pages of additional information. So the question is where can you find the PAPG? Anybody know? Well, I'm going to suggest the obvious, on the NSF website.
Somebody said NSF website right behind you.
Okay, great. All right. All right, so here's some things before you get too involved in the RFP and planning out your proposal. You should contact your sponsored research office to involve them at the start. I don't know, Adam, do you want to say a couple of words about why?
Every college has a sponsored programs office, research and sponsor programs. There are different names, but they are your experts on campus when it comes to submitting these. When you submit them, it has to be submitted from that office. They're the authorized signatories for these. They will help you with budgets. They will help you with other resources that the college might have. They will have their own timelines you will have to abide by when submitting these. So don't just read the RFP, see that it's due in 3 months and wait until a week before to tell your sponsor programs office. Tell them as far out as you can so they can prepare and work with you the entire time and make sure that you have the best proposal you can.
Great, thanks. All right. We've actually talked about some of this eligibility, but we're going to go into these details as we look at the RFP itself. All right, so another question. So one thing to notice, so we're going to look at this RFP right on the first page. One thing to notice is that they are listing here a number of agencies. So we see NSF, we also see NIH, NIFA, USDA, the UK Research and Innovation Office, actually 3 UK things, the US Israeli connection, and one with China. So they don't say anything about that, but this is not normal. This is not a normal RFP. So the fact that NSF and NIH are on the front page of this RFP is hugely significant. So they don't tell us yet why. So we're going to pay attention to what that means for this RFP. And as you will see, as we read it, it gets kind of convoluted. And I've now read this thing several times, and there is a couple of things that I am not clear about. So we do have the deadlines right here.
One is that if this is not a normal RFP, Linda, what can you explain what you mean by a normal RFP?
Okay, good question. Yeah, sorry. A standard RFP would really be primarily a single PI or 1 or 2 other co-PIs. It's more of a a single project. It's pretty self-contained. It's not a highly collaborative proposal. It's not, it doesn't have mandatory collaborators. It's not mandating a highly interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary project. It's usually like a lead PI, two, 1, 2, 3 co-PIs. And it's a much more, when you look at that type of RFP, you'll notice that it has basic requirements. It'll tell you a lot of the same things that we're going to look at today without all of the other complications. So I think, in looking at this one, I think it's actually good because it makes you aware of the kinds of things that you should be paying attention to without, but also includes all of the things that a regular proposal RFP would have. All right, so here we can see deadlines, and can note that after 2022, they're planning this program to continue because it's annually thereafter. It doesn't mean it won't stop at some point. The other thing to note in this one, that they're giving you this little bit here, important information and revision notes. So why do you think they tell you this? I mean, it's a new RFP, so why are they telling you what they've revised? Yes, Patty is right. I think that's the answer. And there might be other answers, but yes. So if you have applied to it before and you just think you're going to resubmit, it's telling you, well, if you're going to submit again, pay attention because we've changed a few things that you should be aware of. So they've increased the funding. That's good to know. They've added math and they've taken out another council. So these are things to know, because if you include in your proposal this UKRI Natural Environment Research Council, then your proposal would be returned without review or would be rejected because it's wrong. And then it's also reminding you to use the new PAP sheet. So go to the next page. The next page. Yes, there's a few things on this page. So my question next is, where does NSF direct types of questions? So you may have questions when you're looking at a RFP. You may have different types of questions. There might be administrative questions like how do you know what documents to submit, or more a specific detail about a budget, let's say, that's more administrative. Or you may have questions about the program itself. But where do you direct these questions? Or let me rephrase that. Does NSF tell you who you can contact with questions?
Does it appear on this page?
Does it appear on this page? Somewhere in the middle. Yes, it does. So these are the program officers now.
So how do you know? So if there's this long list, you just start at the top, or do you try to figure out who is the appropriate person in your field or discipline?
Yeah, so this is a good question. And I'm going to tell you. So yeah, so you can start looking and you see there's different program, there's different programs listed. So we have NSF Bio, NIH FIC, NSF Bio, NSF SBE, NSF Geo, so we see some different agencies. And the other thing is, so let's first talk about, we see a number from Bio, NSF Bio. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I'd say. So the majority of them are actually NSF Bio. So, and you'll see this is, if you're applying just within a bio program, there might be a number of program officers listed. So for that, what you should do, what would be a good strategy, you don't have to do this. A bad strategy is to email them all at the same time. Don't do that. What you should do is look at they'll have a bio at a minimum on the NSF website, and you can get a sense of each one's expertise. And I suggest you first contact the one whose expertise is closest to yours, because they will be able to give you the best advice. You can also, once you have a little bit of information, you can Google them, find out more. And, and so you contact the one that you think is the best fit. And if you don't hear from them after a couple of weeks, you can recontact them. And if you still don't hear from them, then you can contact somebody else. But people at NSF like to remind the rest of us that NSF is a small building. People have offices next to each other. And if you start contacting them all together, they're all going to hate you. So you don't want to do that. But then, we also see that there's NIH listed here and these other agencies. So these would be the contacts, program officers, if you think your project is ultimately going to be a good fit with them. But let's not talk too much about that until we get further into the RFP and see why these agencies are listed on this proposal, because it gets a little bit complicated. All right, so here we have the synopsis of the program. So I think we can all agree that it's, why this is important is because we need to know what they're looking to fund, right? And this is the short version of what they're looking. And what I've done here is I've just highlighted keywords. So for most of us who are not experts in the ecology or the evolution of infectious diseases, that's not really relevant or important as we look at what this RFP is doing. Because in every RFP, what you can do is pick out keywords to make sure that you're focusing, you're really understanding what they're saying here when they say, they support research on, and they tell you exactly what they're supporting. Then the central theme of submitted projects must be. So they're laying out exactly what they're looking for. And the more you vary from that, then the further away you're getting from potential funding, I would say. They tell you what the intent. Projects should be broad, interdisciplinary efforts that go beyond the scope of typical studies. The other thing you should keep, the other thing I like to tell people is when you're looking at sort of keywords and concepts, you'll notice that oftentimes some are really repeated a number of times. And I think that's a good clue. If they repeat things like interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, integrative systems, and if those words appear often, like more than twice, to me, that means that they're really, really looking for that. It's not something that they've put in as, oh, this would be nice. That, if they put in interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, integrating throughout the RFP, that means if you submit a single PI proposal with one discipline, you're really out of the scope of the project. So, so this is like a reading strategy. Keywords are really important, I think. Again, questions about the budget would also go to the program officer. All right, so this slide is what I'm calling essential questions while digesting the RFP, because you really should digest it. It should be like your little Bible for the amount of time that you're writing a proposal. And each of these big questions, we're going to go through and analyze this RFP now. So where does NSF tell you what research they are looking to fund and what's been funded with this program? And why do they tell you this? And then the sub question is how can you determine if your idea is a fit? So the other thing to notice in an RFP, and you'll see this in all of them, is that these first couple of pages are a summary of program requirements. They also give you a little bit about the award information, eligibility, a little bit about proposal preparation, review criteria, but that's the summary. So that's sort of like the cliff notes of the proposal. Then you have a table of contents, which is handy because it's hyperlinked, so you can actually go to specific sections. It also is a nice little overview of the different topics that are covered in the RFP. But what we'll notice here is that if we look at the actual full description of this program, there's a much longer description of what they're looking for and why they're looking for it, right? So what do you think is going on with this introduction? So, I'm just going to read through some like introductory sentences and stuff, so you sort of get a big picture idea of it. They start with, the past 25 years have seen a dramatic increase in our awareness of the need to understand the ecological and evolutionary drivers, right? While our knowledge has increased, the emergence and reemergence of numerous infectious diseases around the world has coincided with unprecedented rates of change. It's bigger. In the structure and diversity of the environment and human and social economic systems. So just in this sentence alone, what are they setting up here? What are they telling you in these like first bits that I just went over? Are they giving you any hints about what kind of multidisciplinary approaches they're thinking about? To Thomas's question, I'm going to say no for now, and you'll see why later. Because later on, it does specifically say that clinical research is not allowed. So that's how I know that's not why. But the human health part is why NIH is involved. Yeah, okay, so Juan is talking about social science aspects. So I think that's a good point. So they're not just talking about like statistical analysis of public health. They're not doing, it's not just biology and microbiology, chemistry. They're also talking here specifically about human social and economic systems. So they're talking much more about a systems approach. You can see that. And so they're also starting to identify what they think are the gaps. There's been 25 years of research they're sort of indicating, but there's been a lot of broad scale environmental changes. There's expansion of human social economic networks. The emergence and reemergence of infectious diseases may point to underlying predictable ecological and eco-evolutionary relationships. But this word here, however, usually when a however starts a sentence, that means there's something new or something missing. So here they're sort of laying out the relationship of factors to the biotic and structural complexity is poorly understood. So they're telling you what they see as a gap. So in a sense, what they've given you in this introduction is kind of their version of a literature review. They're kind of justifying to proposers what they see as the need and the gaps. What's the need for this research that they're looking for? What are the gaps that they're hoping that you're going to fill? So here they say at present, basic and applied research in infectious disease ecology and evolution are not well integrated. The potential benefits of an interdisciplinary research program in this area include, and they have all these bullet points. So all of these things seem to be things that they're interested in. All right. So this is NSF's own rationale for the program, and they're also identifying for you the gaps that they see. So it doesn't mean that you can't identify other gaps, but whatever you're thinking should kind of address what they're laying out. All right. Now, after we've seen their introduction, their justification, their kind of literature review background, there's a fuller, it's a much longer program description than we saw in the summary. So there's a lot more detail here. So there's a number of things that in this program, and so here we'll get a better sense of why these other agencies are included in this RFP. So again, they're looking for, so they tell you here, projects must address the quantitative, mathematical, or computational understanding of pathogen transmission dynamics. So right off the bat here, if you don't want to do something, if you want to do a qualitative study of societal understanding of disease, it's not going to fit this program, right? You've got to do something that's quantitative, mathematical, or computational. It's got to have that element in there, or of pathogen transmission. And if you don't have that, you're totally out of the scope of the program. They laid that out pretty clearly. They also expect you to generate rigorously characterized and tested models. So they're looking for models. They tell you what they see are the most competitive, what have been the most competitive proposals. So I would pay attention to that. And they also say that these proposals are typically interdisciplinary in their approach and the nature of the questions being addressed. So they're laying out not only what they're looking for, but how they the overall approach, really broadly interdisciplinary. And they're also suggesting that it's not just different disciplines addressing a single question, but that the question itself should have an interdisciplinary component. So this is actually a pretty long project description. They aren't always this long and detailed, but again, and one reason, so I'll go back and say that one reason that we're doing this, how to read an RFP, is now you might be surprised, but there are PIs who I know for a fact don't really read the RFP. And as you can see in this one, if you don't read it, there is a lot you could miss, right? So the key, there's one essential thing. There's really two essential things when you're writing a proposal. One is that it follows all the rules, so you're not returned without review just for leaving out something that was supposed to be there. And the other is that your project has to fit what the program's looking to fund. And if it could be a brilliant proposal, but if it doesn't fit what they want to fund, then it's not going to get funded. And where you find that out is in the RFP and in talking to the program officer. So I've sort of grouped this with a blue line, all this part of it. So here, you can see that they're telling you exactly what the program goals are, what their specific focus areas are. They're giving you details of what the project should address. They're also giving you ideas of what the parameters of expected outcomes are. They want to see a model, they want it to be tested. They want to see something that tells us something about the ecology of pathogen transmission, right? But in here, they don't explicitly tell you that your intellectual merit and your broader impacts should be X, right? But I think we can infer some things in here about what the intellectual merit and broader impacts of a competitive proposal might be. So, they kind of spell out the intellectual merit. So what do you think a broader impact could be of this proposal? I'm talking about the broader impacts of the science itself, not of any public outreach program. The science itself, what could be a broader impact? Anybody have any ideas? Like who would benefit from research done for this program? All right, so Patty, what does application of the proposed model mean? What is that? Well, if we want to, like, depending on exactly what somebody was studying, but you know, it's within reason that someone could study COVID through this proposal, right? So clearly, societal benefit might be that maybe there's, you know, let's say the model like connects political systems to disease transmission and interventions. So that's like, we got politics, we got vaccines, we got masks, you know, so and then there's this actual virus traveling around, and there's some sort of model that does that. Who's going to benefit that?
So I'll read some of the chat now. Someone said perhaps municipalities or countries could use the models developed to prevent future crises.
Right. Yeah. It might impact, you know, how people like Dr. Fauci, you know, present information to the public, let's say, or how they present it to healthcare workers. You know, there's any number of ways that this could benefit human health, right? It might, you know, it might help us understand the bigger environment and how what we do with the environment is like helps these viruses thrive, right? So there's any number of possible factors that would help society. I mean, you would have to tie this more specifically to your proposal. You know, if you would just say that society would benefit, you'd have to get much more specific, but we're not going to go into it in that today. But so those kinds of things are kind of inferred here. All right, so if we go down to this next paragraph, they are telling you what kind of teams they're looking for. So it's here we're moving towards, it's a short paragraph, and they're telling you that they think that these studies are going to be complex and that multidisciplinary teams of domestic and international collaborators with expertise from diverse disciplines are likely to be most effective. So they're not telling you you must do this. It's not a mandate, but they are telling you that if you don't do this, we're probably not going to think it's that great a proposal. You know, so they also, besides having this like multidisciplinary diverse team, they're also looking for how these multiple disciplines are going to be integrated and how investigators in the US and other collaborations are going to be prepared to further this research. So they actually don't really talk about a management plan in this RFP, but that's the kind of thing they're seem to be looking for. It's like, it's not really just a good idea to say, well, we have like Dr. So-and-so from the US who's going to look at this, and Dr. So-and-so from the Netherlands who's going to look at this, and it's different, you know, they're in psychology and this one's in economics and that one's in microbiology, and then we're going to do this project. They want to know how these different people are going to actually work together. Why are you bringing these different disciplines together, but also what is the plan so these different disciplines are integrated? So then this one I've highlighted in a slightly darker color. I have a typo. So they're saying here that this program is not intended to be the only avenue of support by the participating agencies for supporting research on infectious diseases. So they're telling you that these agencies support other programs as well. So they're saying, you know, proposals submitted in response to this solicitation must address, and they tell you what it is. But investigations that are outside the scope of this announcement include, and they tell you very clearly what they're not going to fund through this proposal. So you really do need to pay attention to that. They will not fund any of this in this call. Then it does say that it welcomes but does not require that projects include international collaborators. All right, but now here we get to, so this is the more unusual part of this proposal, or this RFP, I mean, EEID partner interests. So here we have 3 NIH agencies, USDA, NIFA, and there's a number of international partners. And they lay out like what these interests, what the interests of these different agencies are. What are they, what kinds of things are these specific agencies looking for? So these are potential partners or potential funders for your project. So we don't need to look at what each agency is looking for because we're not actually planning to apply for this at the moment. But so here is a lot more information about the award itself, and it tells you that it's, so here's where you can see it starts to get a little more complicated, that the maximum award size for all years for the US component is $3 million, including indirect costs. So a single project funded through the US could get up to $3 million. The minimum award size is 1.5 million. So one thing to keep in mind, if you are someone who is familiar with NIH, is that with NIH, your indirect costs are on top of your budget, whereas at NSF, the indirect costs are part of your budget. And this is a huge difference. And I have seen a couple of people make that mistake, so don't make that mistake. Your grants office should help you ensure that you don't do that. And then collaborative projects can request additional funding for international components. It's a 5-year project, or a maximum is 5 years. RCN, we're not going to get into that. All right, so they're anticipating about 12 new awards for 2022. And then they lay out some, so as we read through this, details are emerging. So 15.1 million is going to come from the NSF. 7.5 million is going to come from the NIH. 5 million will come from NIFA. And then of those 12 awards, up to 4 are anticipated to be US-UK collaborative projects. All right, so let's start with the first, that there's 12 new awards. So what is the fact that there's 12 new awards tell you? Besides the fact that there's 12 new awards, does it give you an indication of anything else? Do you think this is going to be a competitive process? Framed in, is it going to be easy to get one of these awards? Yeah, Patty's saying you must write a top-notch proposal. Yeah, I mean, 12 is not a lot, right? And if they say that 15 million is coming from the NSF, if we divide 3 into 15, that gets to be 5, right? So that means 5 out of NSF. That's not very many. So it's looking to me like this is going to be highly competitive. So one, it's going, you have to write a top-notch proposal. Yes, it's going to take a lot of time to do it. All right, but then, so I highlighted that different amounts are going to be funded by NSF and then NH. So this next paragraph.
Just to go into the chat, with the foreign aspect of this, if you are a proposal with US-China collaborations, only 2 may be funded, so it's even more competitive.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, however you look at it, this is going to be really competitive. And then if you start, and once we get to this next one that I've highlighted in sort of pale orange, it's also, if you're not funded by NSF and you're funded by another agency, it's also a lot more work because there is additional work. So here it says, upon conclusion of the review process, meritorious proposals may be recommended for funding by either NSF, NIH, or USDA at the option of the agencies, not the proposing organization. So the proposing organization would be whatever college you're submitting from. So you don't get to decide which agency is going to fund your proposal. The review process will decide that. But they don't just decide, if they decide, if NSF wants to fund you, then you've actually got the easiest path because NSF will then decide to fund you. Great, your proposal is done, unless they want some revisions and changes to your budget and those kinds of things. But if it is going to be, perhaps they're not promising that it would be funded by NIH, it's being recommended, but in order for that process to go and set in motion, they're saying, that these reviews and the panel summary will be shared with NIH or USDA, and then proposals selected by them will need to be reformatted and resubmitted to that agency. So whatever so you have to submit your proposal to NSF, but if it ultimately is to be funded by NIH or the USDA, it has to be resubmitted in their format. So that sounds like a great deal of fun, but having read this RFP thoroughly, you wouldn't be surprised if that happened in the end, right? What that all entails is not all that clear, but there are ways to find out a little bit more. But it also lays out more specifics about what happens if it's being referred to funding by these other agencies, and there's more details in this RFP about that. So eligibility information. So let's talk about that. Because this will vary across RFPs quite a bit. And this is something you really must pay attention to. It tells you who can submit proposals. So here they're just referring you to basically anyone who's eligible in the, according to the APG. Although here unaffiliated individuals are not eligible to submit proposals. Who may serve as PI? For this RFP, there's no restrictions. Anybody could be a PI as long as they're affiliated with an appropriate organization. There is not a limit on the number of proposals per organization for this one. There is, however, a limit on the number of proposals a PI or a co-PI can be on. They can only be on 2. And so for this, except for an RCM. So, and here NSF is starting to put this into its eligibility guidelines. They're putting that responsibility on you so that if you say you have, you are the PI and your co-PI is at another institution and they get asked to be a co-PI at their institution. Well, okay, that's fine so far. But then what if they get asked to be a co-PI on yet a third proposal? And you don't know about the other 2. They're making it your responsibility to make sure that the team is eligible in these guidelines. So you have to be sure that your team tells you what else they're doing. Oftentimes on other RFPs, there are limits to who can serve as a PI. There may be some conditions on that. They might have to be in like For an engineering type proposal, maybe the PI has to be in an engineering department. There's different possibilities here. So often, sometimes there are limited submissions where an institution can only submit 1, 2, or 3 proposals. And with CUNY, that gets to be an interesting question, because sometimes the institution is your individual college, and sometimes it's at a higher institutional CUNY level. So all of these things, and this is where your grants office is also an important asset to help you make sure that you're following all of that. Then NIH also has additional eligibility, and I mentioned earlier that they said clinical trials are not allowed, and here's where they spelled that out. And NIFA also has eligibility. All right. All right, so here we have proposal preparation and submission. Instructions. So what are you going to find out here? Here there's basic, you can apply, you can submit it through 3 different ways these days. Special information, they do, because they're asking for multidisciplinary and probably multi-institution proposals, they're telling you that it has to be a single proposal submission with subawards to the other organizations. So that is also important and crucial information for your grants office. Results of prior support, they're telling you some additional information that they want to see here that is relevant to this type of proposal. REUs, if you want money for undergraduate experience, then they want it included in this original proposal rather than as a supplement. They have an additional requirement for a senior personnel spreadsheet, which is another thing that you have to do immediately after you submit the proposal, not with the proposal. They have specific additional requirements for the data management plan. Letters of collaboration, they're giving you the template that you must follow. General advice is to not get creative with the template that they give you. Just use the template. If you have somebody who sends you something else, ask them to redo it, because you don't want to run the risk of having done all of the proposal and your proposal being returned without review because you were too creative with your letters of collaboration. Then for these other US-UK collaborative proposals and for other international proposals, they also have supplementary documents that you would have to include with the proposal. So here we have a little bit more on budgets. Cost sharing is not allowed, and that's most common at NSF. On occasion, you will find one where cost sharing is, the only time you would include cost sharing is if they require it, in which case you must talk to your grants office, because you do not have the authority to authorize cost sharing by your institution or by CUNY. So that's a higher pay rate that you have. There are other budgetary limits that they talk about. They talk about subawards, the due dates again, a little more details on submitting. So then you get to this section, NSF proposal processing and review procedures. Some people may stop reading once they get to this page, but that would be a serious mistake. So one question is when you write a proposal, who are you writing it to? Okay, program officers and the reviewers both. Yes. Okay, excellent. Yes, and here they tell you about the review process. So you do, if you're writing to reviewers, you want to be as clear as possible on what those reviews are going to be looking for. And for NSF, this part here is pretty much standard for all RFPs. You will find this in every RFP that NSF submits. It's good to understand what it is they mean by all of these things. But remember that NSF is always looking for advancing knowledge. They're looking to produce new knowledge, innovations, and also equally produce, achieve societal goals. And those may be through sort of public outreach programs, but also the societal benefits of the research itself. And they tell you the intellectual merit criteria. And oftentimes, they also give you these additional elements, but then, this is the part you don't want to miss. If you're familiar with the earlier part, you don't want to miss the additional solicitation specific review criteria. Many programs will have, even if they're only within NSF, will have additional criteria. And in a sense, they're giving you the answers to the test, so it's wise to pay attention to that. This one is a little bit unusual because they're telling you the 5 review criteria for NIHR. So we're actually getting close to, it's a little bit over an hour now, but so I have another question. So we've pretty much gone through it. And we've gone through most of these questions. It tells you what you need to write and submit, but I have a couple of questions. So there's 2 documents, there's probably more than that, but there's at least two documents that haven't been mentioned in this RFP. So do you know what they are? And because they're not mentioned, how would you handle them? And they're documents that are sort of the core of every research proposal for NSF. All right, I'm going to tell you. So they do not mention the project summary, and they do not say anything about the project description particularly, right? I don't believe I came across anything that talks about those. So if you're familiar with NSF, you know that the project summary is 1 page and what they want for that, and that the project description is generally 15 pages, but they don't say anything about that. So what does that mean? What do you do? Should there be any question about what you need to do for those? PAPG, yes. Yes, so there's no question. Because they don't mention it, you have to follow what the PAPG says. So you just revert back to the PAPG, it's 15 pages. They tell you the font size that's allowed, the types of fonts that they allow, the margin size, and do not veer from those, because if you do your proposal in a 9-point font with a 0.5 margin, your proposal will be returned. So I have one question. So if I were going to apply for this program, and I were someone who, and I really think my project would be better funded by NIH than NSF. I've read through this RFP several times, and I know that it has to be submitted to NSF, but it could be funded by NIH, and at which point at a later date, I would have to reformat it. But what I don't know is exactly how to frame the proposal for NSF. Should I frame it as if I'm thinking that NSF would fund it, or should I frame it with the idea that I think NSF would fund it? Because they fund 2 different things. And I looked on the website and I don't see anything. So I have that question. How might I get an answer to that question? Yeah, contact the program officer and possibly one from NIH. I'd actually probably talk to NSF first because it has to be submitted to NSF. I would talk to them and try and get some clarification on what my strategy should be for this proposal being submitted to NSF, because that part to me seems kind of unclear. I was hoping that I would find a webinar that they've done with, about this program, but I don't see anything. The other thing I didn't really mention is that it's not part of the RFP, but what you should do, I'm actually going to share a different screen now. not the RFP. So I want to share this. All right. So when you go to a program website, this is also a really important section, awards made through this program. And you can look at projects funded by this program. So that's really important to do. So, and this is good to do before you even talk to a program. So you can research what NSF has funded through this program. And in this, I believe the RFP also gives you links as to for NIH and the USDA. So you can look at what each agency has funded through this program. And that would also give you a really good idea of the kinds of things they're looking for, which agency funds which type of program. You can read the abstracts and get a sense of how they're framed. You can look at the budgets. There's many things you can learn from that. So I highly recommend doing that. So the other thing, this RFP that we looked at didn't mention anything about formatting, pages allowed, and other proposal preparation requirements. So all of those things would be found in the PAPG. They're not veering from any of that. And so it's good to familiarize yourself with the PAPG. Your grants office will help catch mistakes, but you also want to try and not make those mistakes just in case something slips through. Because not following the rules, which would be either the RFP or the PAPG, could mean that your proposal gets returned without review. So that is the worst thing that can happen, because you've done all this work, your team has done all this work, you want to at least get reviews. So the RFP versus the PAPG. So the PAPG is updated yearly. Be certain you have the current one. It has all sorts of rules. It's long. It's not that interesting to read, but you have to. And remember always that the RFP, if it says something different, it supersedes the PAPG. So everything starts with the RFP, so you should know exactly what it says, and you should be able to interpret it, and what you can interpret, you should talk to the program officer. So you don't want to be this person, right? You don't want to just read the instructions and not understand them, because you could end up with kind of a hot mess. All right. So again, if you have any questions about a specific NSF program or RFP, you should ask the program officer. And when is a good time to talk to the program officer? Is the best time a couple of weeks before the program is due, the proposals due? Is that a good time? Well, now might be too soon, unless you know you're going to apply for it. But 2 weeks before is way too late. But as soon as you think, so I wouldn't do it immediately. What you should have is an idea. So you don't want to just say, you don't want to call them and say, should I apply for this? You want to actually talk about your idea. So you basically want to, send them, you do it by email, send them one page. This is my idea. This is the research questions, and ask to set up a time to talk about it. See, and you basically want to talk to them about whether it's a good fit. If you have other questions like how you should frame this project, if you're thinking it would be funded by NIH, you probably still need to have an idea, because they need to be able to have a context to talk about. So you need to do some work before you contact them, but don't wait until too late, which means you need to start thinking about your proposal with enough time to be able to do all of these things. All right, so I mentioned the handout that we've made available. You can use that as you're reading through an RFP on your own. So I have some things about, are you ready to write a proposal? So readiness is important. You need to have a fundable idea, sufficient preliminary work or data to support your proposal, to demonstrate feasibility. You need time, and you need to have a qualified team. So I'm sort of zipping through these things. The slides will be available. You need realistic timelines to develop a proposal. So research what's been funded, I've gone through. So in terms of timelines, so this is a really broad suggestion. It's really more, it should be more than a suggestion. It should be a rule, but we don't like rules in this country. But these are kind of minimums. So for a center and highly collaborative proposal, which I would consider this, the RFP that we just looked at, it's not quite a center proposal, but it's highly collaborative. It has lots of moving parts. You know, there's all these different agencies. It does have to be multidisciplinary. There may be international collaboration. So I think probably starting this at least 1 year out would be wise. Less than that is going to be a really big crunch. And for a single PI, regular type proposal, 3 to 6 months may be sufficient. You may start earlier. And because you need time for planning, you want to identify the opportunity, brainstorm ideas with your team. You need time for writing. Then there's the submission aspects. But the writing actually takes a fair amount of time. And the key to a competitive proposal, besides following the RFP and the fit, is actually revisions. If you write your proposal and then submit it, you have no idea what the mistakes are. Everything could be improved. You need other people to read it, and all of this takes time. And the more collaborators you have, the more time it's going to take. So that's all of the presentation. And then I have a boot camp that is starting early October that we're going to focus on conceptualizing your research to fit a specific federal funding agency or a major nonprofit sponsors such as NSF, NIH, NEH, DoD, DOE, IES, Spencer, Simons, etc. So it's going to be some lectures, some homework assignments, and group discussions. And so we also sent you the flyer for that. There is a registration link. The website at the ASRC, I don't think is ready yet, but so if you're interested in that, you can apply. It is going to be a limited group because it's much more intensive than this kind of webinar. So okay, so we can have questions now. Any other questions that I didn't answer?
I know there's some people in here from other grants offices in CUNY. If someone wants to maybe chime in and think what's a good timeline for their office, how far in advance someone should let them know they're thinking about submitting a proposal, because it probably varies at the different campuses. Anyone?
Well, we could have another question, like how many people now feel confident that they know how to read an RFP?
I'm just going to interrupt for 1 minute. Effie is having some technical glitch. She cannot see her screen at all. So she will not be able to moderate anymore. I'm so sorry.
Okay.
If
Yeah,
you have
I'm
any
looking at
questions.
the chat. Board information process. That's, I mean, after something is awarded, I think that's a whole different kettle of fish, which I don't really know that much about. How many proposals are actually returned without review? Well, I don't know, but I know of some who have. I know of a few that have been. I know of one instance where somebody submitted a career proposal and mistakenly didn't include the indirect costs within the budget and was told kind of the day before the proposal was due by the grants office, but that person had already departed for another country for vacation and didn't have time to fix it, and did discuss it with NSF and did have the proposal reviewed, but with the understanding that it was not going to be funded. So it wasn't quite returned without review, but that was a special case. I know of another case where somebody on a large collaborative proposal did not include their prior NSF support, and the whole proposal was returned without review. So it does happen. Explain the 101. All right, so the 101 bootcamp is focused, one, it's broader. It's it's not specific to the NSF career proposal. But it's also for, I have different types of people that I think would benefit from it. So people, any CUNY faculty who haven't yet previously written or submitted a grant proposal to a federal funding agency. So that is one group of people. People with NIH funding who would like to learn how to reframe their research to fit NSF. So I've actually worked with people a number of times in my career bootcamp, and because NIH and NSF are so different, it can take quite a while to reframe their research to fit NSF. And this is a way to start thinking about it earlier. And then there are also people, and I know this to be a fact, that there are a lot of people who want to apply for a career award, but for who the research actually is still a little bit fuzzy. So what I'm doing this fall is focusing on developing the research, the conceptualizing the research, formulating research questions, because you can't write a proposal, can't write the rest of the proposal until you have those elements down, and they take quite a bit of time. And so for some people, this is going to be quite valuable prior to doing the career bootcamp, if that's what you want to apply for, especially if you haven't submitted an NSF grant before. This is a good opportunity, because there are people who actually spend a year developing a career award, let's say, and I don't know if I could do a career award bootcamp for a year without and still survive it, but this in a sense extends it. So it opens the boot camp in the fall to a broader group, but some of those people will go on and do the career boot camp as well. Does that answer your question?
Next question here. What are the major differences between NSF education grants, RFPs, and research ones?
Well, part of it depends on which NSF education grant it is, but I would say they all have, every grant opportunity at NSF is research driven. So, but if it's going to be, say you're applying for a standalone REU or an STEM, those projects are tailored to undergraduates, which is different than applying for an NRT, a national research training grant, which is targeted to graduate students, master's and PhD students. They all have a research component, but there's also a strong educational component. So, but they're all different. So it's hard to generalize it. A strictly research proposal would definitely be driven by the research and probably would include students, but those would be students in the lab probably, or there might be an outreach program to, say, third graders where you're doing a program to teach them something cool about your science. Those are very different from the research. It gets a little murkier in a career proposal, which is both research and education, but it's still a research-driven proposal. But the education part has to be quite strong. And for that one, there's sort of an expected level of educational activities that are beyond what you do as an assistant professor. And those also have to be justified with a bit of a literature review, evaluation. An STEM, say, would have, those are more scholarships for students, but what are those students going to do? What research would they be working on? Who's going to mentor them? So there's a lot more focus on how those students are going to be supported, why they're going to be supported, how they're going to be selected, than there would be in a regular research proposal. But each one is slightly different, which is why it's really important to be able to read the RFP. Award notification. Basically, if you're about to be funded, you get different types of emails or calls from the program officer. One might say, great, you've been awarded. That would be the easiest one. Sometimes you'll get something, well, we're considering funding your proposal. Please adjust the following. Please answer these following questions. We have these concerns. Please address them. You might have to do that. Sometimes they ask for a different type of abstract. So one thing is that there's not uniformity across NSF programs. So different programs do things differently. But you can always talk to your grants office once you get any kind of notice and figure it out. Sociologist interested in the career program. Yeah, social scientists are fine. Yeah, we like to have social scientists.
I had a question directed just to me about, just to re-ask the question I asked the grants offices. Just an idea for your offices, what kind of lead time do you want when PIs are applying for grants? Like what would be ideal versus what you're used to? And if someone wants to be unmuted and answer, we can just unmute you. Okay, so it looks like for a couple of the schools, it looks like a month is a good lead time. I agree. At least at the ASC, a month would be nice. 3 months would be nicer. I would like to know as soon as you're even thinking about it, because it helps me schedule who's going to be working on what grants. If we have to reach out to 4 different subawardees, because that's working with 4 different schools and getting documents from them. So, I mean, I would say as soon as you know you're going to apply for something or thinking about it, to go to your grants office and let them know.
Yeah, and then keep in mind that there's kind of 2 different parts of submitting a grant. One is the actual writing of the proposal itself, and that you should start thinking about well before a month in advance. And if you want help from somebody like me, then you're talking about months to a year. Whereas there's the actual documents that have to be submitted and all of the subawards coordinated and all of that other kind of stuff. And that also takes time. So the more I'm just gonna say generalize that the more complex the proposal, the longer the lead time should be. Like if it's a single PI and you've got one project description, it's just you and you've got all your documents, that's easier to manage than a center award with 35 collaborators, right? And each one's going to need a bio sketch and they're going to need a budget and they're going to need this and all that, so. But yeah, as soon as you are starting to think about a proposal, it would be highly appreciated to talk to your grants office. And there's really no downside to doing that. They don't punish you if you don't actually.
Well, it's 2:30, so our time is technically up.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for coming. Remy, do you have any? I don't know if you want to add something for
Yes, I would just to like make let everyone know that obviously this has been recorded, and we will upload the recording version and Linda's presentation on our website. I'll put the link to the website on the chat, and I will send an email hopefully by next week to all the registrants who that informing that the link has been the presentation, the link has been uploaded to the website.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.